All right. Welcome to the 19th call. Getting close to the 20s here. It's been quite the journey getting to this point. Today, kind of like normal, going to go over some quick updates just on where things are, and then probably continue where we left off last week with discussions about the contract kit and its goals of really simplifying the developer experience of retrieving data from tables. It's been on our mind. It's been a couple weeks now that our team has been talking about this internally, and we're really trying to just expand the conversation outside of our little echo chamber to everybody else in the community that it has thoughts and input and has used this interface to build front-end applications and maybe what they would like to see on it. So finding my window. As far as updates that are going on in the session kit, the web renderer, like we said last week, and the session kit, the 0.5 release is out. There have been a couple minor patches to address some things. I think we're at 0.5.3 on the web renderer at this point. Those are all just kind of addressing like build issues and some things that users have been run into and been reporting. Nothing major is changing besides just fixing these build issues. The session kit does have another major update coming. It'll be another breaking change that, you know, if you're going to upgrade from 0.5 to whatever this next version is, the one big thing that's going to change is the session kit initializer is going to go from 1 parameter to 2 parameters. The first parameter is going to be really similar to what existed today, but some of the parameters are moving out from the first parameter, moving into the second parameter. It's going to be divided up like the session instance is, where the first parameter of the session kit is all required data, and the second one is all optional data. So we're just kind of dividing the required from the optional. First one's going to be the session kit args, the arguments that are required, and the second one will be the session kit options. So it's just kind of a design pattern that was chosen that was a little inconsistent in current versions of the session kit. And this is just to make it that kind of a consistent pattern that, you know, that first parameter is going to be required. The second one will have optional data fields. And this will help a little bit with some IDEs and developer environments to really help enforce which ones need to be there and which ones can be there.
So in this case, like something like chain would be, and wallet plugins would be forced, for example, and then
correct.
I don't know, app name, transact plugins, and
yeah. To be really specific, the arguments are going to be the app name, the chains, and the UI, and the wallet plugins, and then everything else is going to go into the second parameter, which is like default expiration, plugins, the plugin options.
So even the storage.
Yeah, storage will go into the second one.
Because without storage, if it's an optional field, you can never restore sessions, right?
By default, if you're using the session kit, storage has a default value now. So okay. It's not required for you to put in unless you want to override and build custom storage functionality.
Okay, so by default, or like for example, for us, we just name it something, and then if you check like the actual local storage, it uses that name. You pass the new browser local storage. So now that you're saying it's just a default optional one.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. So there was no real reason to make users or developers to pass that in. I think early on, we made it that a requirement to pass it in because we thought maybe the session kit would be useful without it, but it turns out like everything required it. So it needed a default. And so we added it in as a default. And unless you want to modify the behavior of the storage adapter, you don't have to provide it anymore.
Got it. And you said the UI would be optional, or?
Oddly enough, it is optional right now.
Because it's using a Node.js or something.
Yeah, it's going to become required though. after looking into it, there's really no reason to use the actual session kit object in Node.js at this point, specifically this thing, this named session kit. So it is optional right here, but it is going to become required.
Got it.
And maybe we'll add it as a default, so that way it's not even a required field. Like maybe that might make sense as well.
Yeah, like you can override it, you know, like everything else. The same with storage. But yeah, it almost makes sense to like make the second parameter, like instead of making the optional, or at least that, like, you know, like these are the required, these are the optional. There is a required input. It's not necessarily the required parameters that will be instantiated with, right? So like required is like app name and chains and wallet plugins. Everything else goes into the next one, and that's just if you want to override whatever the defaults are. Most users never have to enter that.
Yeah, I have these changes. Yeah, I think we could actually do that with the UI too, and then the only required fields. Let me find. There we go. This is the new build. I just pushed it up. It's obviously not released, but so UI became required. You can see here, these are the required fields, like we're requiring those 4. But really what we could do is with this UI field, we could do the same thing that we're doing with storage, which is if you pass in a storage, we'll use it. Otherwise, we create a new local browser storage based on the app name. So we could probably do that with the UI as well. So that way the only required fields would be the name of your app, the chains that it uses, and the wallet plugins you want. Really simplify things.
I think that's excellent. As few parameters as we can require from developers, the better.
Yeah, very much agreed.
I'm even wondering if you want to keep built-in chains. Like just type their names and that's it.
We do have some chain definitions that are there, and that might actually be something that we could do.
Because they're currently only, I think, part of the Transact plugin. Like the Transact plugin resource provider uses the defaults. So if you have them here already, but you don't have APIs.
Well, yeah, we don't have APIs, but we do have logos. I don't know what we would do for the API side of things. Maybe for chains.
Force more calls to gray mass.
Yeah, I don't know if we want to do that, but it's like all the documents will have it anyways, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. But no, that's definitely something we can consider, though, is having some sort of predefined chain configurations to even limit that. And then when you are including chains instead of the whole JSON object, you could do, maybe there's like a typed object you could import that's called chains with an S. You could do like chains.eos or chains.telos or chains.ux to just give you a default configuration.
And at that point, you don't even need any parameters, right? Because even the app name, you could grab it from, I don't know, like title or some shit. You know,
like,
hey, new session kit. And then you just find like EOS, new session set EOS, and then by default enables just anchor. And you know.
Yeah. There's a fine line probably here to walk about how opinionated we get with defaults, but if it can improve the developer experience for a lot of this stuff, then I mean, they're worth considering, that's for sure.
As long as there's a way to be explicit, I think it's fine.
True. The one thing about the page title and the name is that the app name is actually a name type variable. So it's a int 64 or whatever it is. And the end goal with that is to actually have it match up to some sort of contract name on chain, or at least a name field in a table. And that's what'll link an app to the idea of an app registry on chain that you can then verify what this app is. That's a whole different project, but in anticipation of that, we are using that small name field. So if we use the page name and the page title was really long, it would get truncated and mangled and a whole bunch of other weird stuff.
Yeah.
So we can always revert that if we do need to just make this a string at some point, but
Yeah, like worst
So,
case,
yeah.
you can, like, if nobody specifies, you just call it like test app, for
Yep.
example, right?
But I think in line with what you said before, having it as a default with the ability to override that still gives a better experience for developers. So it's not required.
This is true. This is true. It just, I don't know how we would unmangle it. Because, you know, if you pass on this specific line with app name, if you passed like a 30 character string in here, it's going to turn into like a letter dot dot dot, another letter dot dot. Like,
What's the consideration for apps that don't actually need or want a backend in terms of the smart contract?
That's a good question. That, I guess they would just use something that still fits within the name constraints. The name is only used really on some of the UI elements currently, so I guess it's not a huge deal, but
Like, you know, to use Wharf and its stuff, like say I have the name there utility X, right? And there's a ton of backends, a ton of smart contracts, you know, a bunch of different elements all coming together through this session kit. So, you know, like it's not necessarily tied to one smart contract or one thing, but I guess if you do have a registry that could have some type of, you know, descendants, I guess, and then you can wrap a bunch of smart contracts under, you know, but I don't know, like for example, also use a big smart contract as part of, you know, utility X. So,
but do the users
fall really under? Yeah, they don't, but I think he's talking more about like for metrics and other things and, you know, verifications and, but even then the user can put anything he wants, right? He can pretend to be another app on chain unless he adds some like signing of some sort. So I really think just having a default for it and then overriding it, and, you know, people who want to use those features will define their, you know, their app name correctly. Or even generate a random one that fits the names.
I mean, you could just use the domain name.
it's true. It's true. All right. I mean, we have a couple instances of this where we are like way optimizing for the future, but maybe this app name itself just ends up being some sort of string. I'm trying to think. I'll have to look if there's any other considerations. I know the app name is also passed into Anchor. Yeah.
Does Anchor expect it to be a numerical value?
I think it expects it to be a name type. Yeah. So, but if it's not a name type, it might just get mangled a little bit. But I mean, that happens nowadays anyways with apps that are using Anchor Link, because Anchor Link behaved this same way. It was very much us trying to future-proof the name of the app, and maybe that doesn't make sense in the Wharf context. So I'll jot down a note that we will revisit that concept. And also a note about default UIs. And then if we can make both of those, you know, somehow have defaults and make them more of an optional field, then really the only things that'll be needed when building the session kit itself is going to be the chains and the wallet plugins. Those would be the only two parameters.
As I said, even wallet plugin, like I would even keep that optional personally, because, you know, like the point of Wharf, or one of the goals I think of Wharf, is to make it easier to onboard new developers. And you don't want them to have to go like, okay, let me go examine the wallets. Most of them are going to start by writing like a local app or a local UI test with just how this thing works and how they implement with it. And then like the time they come to learn about, you know, potential different wallets, then they'll know, like, or at least they can easily look up how to easily add it after support for something, for example, other than Anchor. So I don't know, that's really my view, because most, like 99% of users are just going to come in, they're going to want the simplest kind of code and see it working. And then to change it, you know, they can read more about like how to, oh, I want to add support for this other, you know, whatever wallet that's available or that my users requested.
I think the only hurdle there is that the wallet plugins are all external repositories. Like the developer is going to have to install a wallet plugin alongside of it. So like by default, can't include it. One thing we are going to do, though, is that there's going to be another repository on top of this someday. They're the starter kits on the milestone lists. And the starter kits are going to be kind of meta packages that include multiple packages. And that might be an opportunity for us to even simplify this further, because when you install one of these starter kits, it's going to install the session kit. It's going to install the web renderer, and it's probably going to install some default wallet plugins. So from there, we might be able to have more defaults. But from this perspective, I'm not sure how we would do
that's
that
a fair
unless it was a
point.
dependency.
And you don't necessarily want to make it a dependency because like Wharf is independent from Anchor, right? So
yeah,
I hear your point. No, that makes sense.
It's a good thought, though. And I do think there's an opportunity to do that, just maybe not here.
Yeah.
Cool. Kind of looping all the way back. So this is going to create a breaking change, obviously, because the constructor is changing. So anybody that's using this individual session kit object to instantiate logins and restorations or whatever, this will need to be updated in the next version, which maybe a 1.0. I'm not entirely sure yet. We talked about that a little bit.
Going to be a SemVar breaking change so that at least it's not caught by NPM or anything.
Yeah.
Package.
I do think that below version 1.0, the minor versions are considered breaking changes by NPM. So I think we're protected right now, but we're at the point now where I don't think that there are too many major changes with the session kit coming that we couldn't just call the next release a 1.0 and start giving, some confidence to use this in a production environment. So far adoption's been good, and people who've been integrating it, they've found minor things, but overall, like it's serving its purpose.
100%.
Cool. All right, so that, I guess, is the updates on the session kit. The web renderer, I don't think that there's a lot of massive changes coming. If you're using the 0.5, that is, there could be some more tweaks to the UI, some optimizations to it, but there probably won't be any breaking changes coming to that anytime soon. One thing I've been working on since we last talked is a rather large document that outlines the specification for the UIs. It's kind of a guide if somebody actually wanted to build their own user interface instance. It's not easy in this 1.0 version, but it's possible.
Speaking of that, remember we talked about this idea of injecting CSS after, like a way for you to pass your own color scheme. You're not like rewriting the page, but you're adjusting some CSS names that you use, for example, that can be passed on. Is that, just don't know if like anything's been done with that or it's still on the roadmap or not.
Not yet. Nothing's been done to it yet, but we do have an open GitHub issue. We've talked about it a couple times. It's just we haven't prioritized that yet. At this point, with the way that the project milestones look, we've switched a lot of our development over to the contract kit, and the design resources we have moved to the website to start on like all the kind of marketing to developer type stuff, as well as the documentation portal.
Cool.
So it's definitely a good idea and something we probably will do at some point, but I really don't have a timeline for it.
Yeah.
It
At
also
this
got
point,
a
I
little
guess
bit.
one can just edit it in the node module itself.
It's true.
Folder.
It got a little bit more complicated now that there's some SVG elements in there that also match the color scheme. Like there's probably a way in CSS to modify those colors or just hide that element. But for theming, like we'll definitely have to consider those kind of predefined elements as well.
That makes sense.
Cool. So yeah, I guess kind of just to wrap up on the session kit side of things, we're pretty darn happy with where this exists at this point. There probably will be some coming, and it's going to be related to the contract kit, because we've kind of just, I think there's an issue open for it. We need some ways for the contract kit to retrieve data from the session kit. So we're kind of experimenting or exploring the idea of some sort of global state, or maybe some other object that can have some state, just because the contract kit needs to be able to function with a session and without a session, and if, like, let's say you have a block explorer, and very traditionally, for better or worse, on that block explorer page, the home page is like BPs or something like that. You should be able to use the contract kit to load the BPs, but how does the contract kit know which API to use? You could pull that from a session if you had a session, but like, you should still also be able to retrieve and display that information without a session. So we're looking at how do you get access to the chain configurations to know which blockchains to show if there's no user logged in? So this, all in all, is to say that the session kit itself will probably have some modifications to its state. Hopefully it'll be reverse, compatible and won't be a breaking change. But this interplay between these various kits is now something we're also really exploring, and it may warrant changes to the session kit moving forward. So that is also kind of another determining factor on whether we're going to push to a 1.0 or whether the next release will be like 0.6 until we figure this out, and then we can release 1.0 that has this kind of state that other components can access.
Is it going to be a shared state, or is just you talking about the config, like a one-time kind of entry?
It might actually be a shared state. One of the use cases we're considering is something like the Block Explorer, the Open Block Explorer, which supports multiple chains. And there kind of almost needs to be a global state that indicates which blockchain the UI is rendering for at that moment in time. If you were using a multi-chain block explorer and you were on that homepage and it was displaying block producers, which chain do you load block producers from? Like, which API endpoint do you use in a multi-chain environment? So there may be some high-level global state.
But the session kit won't necessarily help you there, right? Like, it's almost like, because you could have a session where you're logged into 4 blockchains, but you still need to know how to iterate. Like, you still need to know for this particular part of the page, what do I want to show? So it's almost like it has to be part of the, like, if you want the maximum flexibility, it almost has to be part of that, like, contract call in a way, or at least contract instance. And it could be a way where, you can define like the defaults, because there's little that the session kit has that necessarily means that will be used by the contract. So maybe there's a way to be like, you create a config, like object, like, app name chain storage. And then, in the examples you do, session kit equals new session kit with this config. And, if you want contract kit for this one chain, which is like most users, you use the same config. Otherwise, you have otherwise you use, if you have 4 chains, no problem, use that same config. And then automatically you have like contract dot name of chain dot, do this or do that. Yeah. Just an idea.
And no, you basically said a lot of what we're kind of thinking. And then this might be an instance as to where if you have one of these global things, like maybe the contract kit inherits from it. So that way, when you instantiate the contract kit or the session kit, like you could not pass the chain configurations, like the chains array, and it would read from this global state and just inherit from it. So that way, when you're using multiple kits, it can all inherit from kind of one bigger configuration thing.
Like you're thinking that you like either inherit, or you mean like a global, like in the UI, basically like say MetaMask injecting it into the window object where everything can access it, kind of thing.
Not entirely sure yet. I mean, I think either they both kind of have their pros and cons.
Yeah.
And then obviously if the developer wants to not use this and control that state themselves, they can, it should be a really simple implementations to do. And then they could do it based on URI or based on the subdomain somehow, or, you know, whatever structure they wanted to use. But for the ease of the initial developer, there might be this new thing that you just define like a Wharf configuration, and then that is kind of its own thing. And then when you instantiate a session kit or a contract kit or the account kit, it knows to look at that thing. And then there would probably be calls on it to switch like active states. Like let's say you have 4 chains and you want the default state to now be UX, there'd be a method to update the state of this global Wharf object to say now Telos is the default, and you as a developer could switch that within this configuration object.
I personally find that could potentially lead to people like, you know, seeing weird behavior sometimes. I almost prefer if you can, you know, do like initiate and instantiate a new, you know, contract or whatever using like, you know, contract.eos or something like that. And then after it, maybe you can say like contract.chain equals, or, you know, like call a method on that object or on that like class or whatever, and like try to then change the chain if you want. But really, like most people are going to have like, they're going to be using some type of reactive library.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure it's going to really matter that much to be able to switch state of a contract. Because otherwise, because if you want to change the state of the contract, then you need to worry again or saving all the results from that previous chain. Because now the guy switches back, he's going to have to refetch it if it's not saved. And if he has to refetch it, what's the point really of changing state? If you might as well rerun your function that displays that, or put it as a reactive property or something else.
Yeah, just want to jump in here. I think the reason why we started talking about this global state thing was because you make it super easy for developers to call these contract methods. So like we were talking yesterday about having like static methods for like find where like these get table rows wrappers basically. I don't know. I haven't looked at the whole video from last week, so I don't know if you guys actually talked about that. But yeah, like it'd be great to have basically like this contract which was generated for like let's say we take the example of the Centium org. It's a contract with a bunch of different tables. So the contract kit would be great for that. So you have this Centium org contract, which inherits from like the base contract. And it'd be great to just be able to take it out of the box and just call this like where methods and then just call like just fetch entries directly from like a specific table without needing to worry about, you know, like setting the client or the session or any of that stuff. If at the same time you're already using the session kit to actually start sessions, which is probably what most users or most developers are going to do. Like they're generally going to use the contract kit in conjunction with the session kit itself. And so it'd be great to just have like this really this ease of use. And I think the best way, we kind of agreed yesterday, the best way for that would probably be the static methods. Of course, like what you were just saying, it'd be great to have a way to also overwrite that and pass whatever chain you want to interact with in the methods. But I don't know. I kind of feel at this point like that we should at least explore this idea of having this global session and this global maybe. So for cases where you don't actually need the session kit itself, then just this global client which knows which chain is needed for these subsequent contract kit calls.
Yeah, I guess that can always, like I said, could be part of that initial kind of config, right? Because if you know, like when designing generally a UI or something, like in the modern stuff, you're gonna have some type of reactivity or state store for any big project, and this stuff is useful for, I think, for like bigger projects. And you know, having that config already in your store, which is like something like, for example, I'll do if I need it in my contract kit, have it already in the state store that I use. It's pretty straightforward. Like my concern here is, you know, maybe I my logins, but maybe I'm showing data unrelated to anything of my logins, right? Like I might be showing like a side chain that is like keeping data. You know, I just don't want it to kind of cause confusion if you're not passing a config and it's getting it from somewhere that is not really obvious that you configured. Like it's not an issue, obviously, for me, but here we're talking about like targeting, you know, people coming into the ecosystem and coming into Wharf specifically as well.
Yeah, but I think in an ideal world, we'd be able to do both. Like, so you'd be able to default to what you want, or to like the session kit chain. And then
Yeah.
you'd also be able to like look up sidechains by just passing either the chain object or like a client object to whatever contract kit method you're using to do what you're talking about, just looking at it.
So in what you're suggesting, say, for example, I do have a session kit that is using this global config, and then I'm instantiating a new contract, right? Or like saying like, I'm still not sure how that's gonna look like. I didn't like go into that yet, like the contract kit. But say I'm instantiating this new contract, say like you would in, you know, whatever, if like Ethereum style Web3, loading the API and whatnot. Like, are you saying that if I have multiple chains in my session kit coming from that global, you know, like config, how is the contract kit gonna know what to do? Is it gonna by default run that for all the chains? And like, I'm not sure, like, or you're gonna have to set now, this is the current active chain in my config for this specific contract instantiation.
Yeah, basically.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, we're gonna have to set which chain is being used for a specific contract. Yeah. So that would be done globally, and then the contract kit would then know, okay, what to use when it's being called, when a method is being called without the chain being specified.
But when you instantiated it, you already chose a chain.
You wouldn't need
every
to
time you call it,
you would just use the static methods directly.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, it's an idea. Honestly, talking about this yesterday, like I don't know if that's what we're gonna do, but it's just an idea which I think is worth exploring.
Yeah,
I think maybe visualizing some of this. I went and looked and I didn't see some of the stuff we were looking at yesterday on GitHub. So I'm just kind of
yeah, I pushed the example contracts class, but yeah, honestly, like a lot of what we talked about isn't there either. So maybe
true.
Start from scratch.
And I guess as I'm typing, if there's something that doesn't look right, Daniel, like correct me.
Sounds good.
So I think so a lot of this is code generation. It'll also be dynamic. So assuming that we're using code generation for contracts, and we'll just use the EOS.io contract as an example, because I think we probably all know that pretty well. There's two ways we're going to be able to do it. I mean, let's just say the contract was EOS.io, and you'd import it from the generated code. Like, it's going to be somewhere in your library. It'll be there. This is a precompiled instance of the contract. So from here, you'd be able to potentially call eosio.tables.producers, right? This, if I can type, this here, one of the changes we're thinking about doing, this is going to be an instance of a table. And this is going to be an array of all tables in the EOS.io contract. Last night, as we had it, we're trying to diverge away from the get table rows call. Like in theory, you would be able to call something like get table rows and then use the JSON blob syntax. But what we're looking at right now is methods called like all. one called like where and one called find. And these
Like
are all going
Mongo
to do different
style.
things. Kind of, yeah. Some sort of like ORM type style. Like if you called this, it's going to just start seeking over the table for you. You would get a cursor back. Like this is going to be a table cursor. Wow. You'd probably await that. And then when you had the cursor back, you'd get, let's say it's 100 by default. You'd be able to iterate over those 100. And then if you wanted the next 100, you'd be able to say cursor.more. You could await cursor.more and intelligently know to be able to use the next key field here to then give you more results, creating really nice.
And then the more can take like obviously like the additional rows you want number if you can specify, for example.
Yes, I think the only thing that this accepts is a limit.
Yeah, exactly.
So this call wouldn't have, I think this might just have a limit too, at least based on our initial designs. And if you actually wanted to do any type of filtering or searching, that's where you'd use the either where or find. The where, which one is the where, Daniel?
Where returns a cursor, but you can actually specify like the fields and like what filtering you want.
This is this the one that uses the primary index?
They both do the find and where, but find returns a single item and where is going to return.
All right.
So it's kind of like find and filter, say in an array in JavaScript, right?
Yeah.
So like this would return the one row where the primary index is Team Gray Mass.
Yeah, except
Like,
we could do that. Although the way I was thinking about it is that you would specify the field that is Team Gray Mass, where Team Gray Mass needs to be the value.
Got it.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes more sense in the find, like which column you're trying to match against.
Yeah, exactly.
And which, is it the first or the second parameter that would be the field name?
First, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it was just an object that I was like, was using the brackets.
Was it name and, you're saying it was like this?
Yeah. Exactly.
Or, so if you
Assuming
wanted,
that the field name is name. Yeah.
right. And then we could interpret how to build the query based on this, because we know in the ABI that the primary key is the name. And then we could do the get table rows, and this would translate into setting the lower and upper bounds equal to this with a limit of 1, and basically just do kind of a translation on this call to a native call, like abstract it completely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's
And
very
then
cool.
I think the where, was this the one with the greater than and less than?
It was from,
But I think,
sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say like usually when they do filters, especially if you have the ABI, you're gonna have to do the conditional statements depend on the type, don't they?
Conditionals depends on the type.
On the type of field you're gonna match the query again. Normally, obviously, I like you can't really do much of that in when you're querying the tables actually through get table rows. But say, you know, like if you're going against a number, a type that's a number or something, you can say greater than or less than.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing a string, includes, right, and like, right, like you're here tied to whatever you can do from get table rows, which you don't get these options.
Correct. I think in this instance, we're translating this all to the limitations of the current API.
No, for sure, yeah.
And I think all of this is going to be translated into lower bounds and upper bounds, and it will it'll do the key translation to be able to let you handle, like if you did, I know there's no index on the producers table, but if you did signing key and then this was pub K1 something, if that index existed, the ABI would know to do all the translation for that. But like the find is find single. This would be find multi. And then I don't know what syntax we're using right now. but it would be something like greater than.
Yeah, we can do that.
What was that?
It was from, and then like other bracket opens, and then you would specify. You can actually technically specify multiple because we could support secondary keys as well. But yeah, so from
like from name gray mass, for example.
name team gray mass, yeah, to name team gray mass.
Yeah, and that would just return the 1. But if you did from, oh man, I don't even know if some other.
Or just you do from and you remove the name, right? It will automatically try to go to the whatever ZZZ or not ZZZ, whatever it was.
Yeah, but like again, we're specifying the column name. I think it was name open bracket from where you want to fetch entries, and then 2 was the other key that was used.
Got it.
You want to fetch entries.
Got it. Yeah, I'm trying to go from memory based on a call last night, and I'm not doing well.
You're doing great.
But and this will always, like rows or like USIO tables.x.where will always return an array, even if the array is empty, and
yes.
defined single will return undefined, I guess, if not found. So it should mimic, normal JavaScript. So you can,
Yep. Yeah, makes sense.
Outside of contract methods, right? You could still have contract methods to return a value, and those would be on the contract itself, correct?
Correct. And like we're doing all this with table on the EOSIO contract. We also want it like you could call reg producer, and then I don't remember all of the names of the fields, but it'd be like team gray mass, pub K1, location URL, something like that. And this would, you'd either, if this instance has access to a session kit, like this could actually perform the transaction and you could await it, or there is probably a way to be able to return this as like the actual action itself. So yeah, and then if you had a return value would come back through that as well. So if this was like a read-only action.
Yeah. No, that's very cool. But then like you have to know the correct serialization order.
We would handle all of that.
But then you don't guarantee, like if you have 2 strings, you don't necessarily know like what field they map to.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, the last time we talked about this, we talked about having.
Yeah. I think an object makes more sense. Like if it's an object and then you can get some, TypeScript style where you hover on reg producer and then just like, boom, it tells you all the fields like it expects.
Yeah, I think it's better. And
yeah,
plan, I think.
Yeah, that's definitely, I guess I didn't remember us talking about making that an object, because then it gets a little bit more verbose because you're going to have to know the field names as well, like signing key. You're going to have to location 126 URL HTTP something. It does get more verbose going this route. The whole idea, I mean, it doesn't matter which way we go, but the whole idea is that when you type EOSIO dot, like your autocomplete's going to know all of the actions. It's going to say, oh, you could type, or you could use reg producer. And then when you open the reg producer function, it's going to know what parameters go in here. So that way you're not hunting and pecking, trying to figure out exactly, oh, what are the fields for the reg producer? This contract knows what they are. So when you're inputting them, like your IDE is going to tell you what data goes next.
Yeah, but like I second the part, keeping it as an object and then having the IDE, automatically tell you like, oh, you're missing like, this field is not optional. Some fields could be optional, but like that kind of stuff, I think is more than great. But at least you don't run into issue where somebody's like, messes up and just, if there wasn't an object, passes on, their public key as their name or, maybe in that case you can check, but like, you know, their location as their signing key or their name, and then it's just like it causes this like non-explicit behavior.
True.
Like it's just
In a
more
type-
confusing.
In a TypeScript world, we will be doing checking, like it'll show up as wrong values or whatever, even if this wasn't an object. But it will also, even in the JavaScript world, be doing type conversion. So if you passed like a name in here, like your code's going to throw an error because it was expecting a public key right here.
Yeah.
So we do have that, like these structs that are being code generated do have some level of type safety and type enforcement within them. So that way you can't, you know, pass like a public key right here or a name here. So, but that's regardless. Either way, if we did an object or a string, like it sounds like, I don't remember the discussion, but we're going to go with the object direction unless there's a really good reason to do the string.
I prefer object because also it's easier to work with, because, you know, sometimes I have like a default object and I want to override some of it. Yes, I can, you know, do the ... and, you know,
True.
but like I find this much kind of cleaner to manage, and the savings is not that, you know, like you want other people to look at the code and know right away what is happening instead of
True.
like hovering over reg produce and what is that the...
Yeah.
That's my
And then
view,
the
at
order
least.
is kind of inconsequential if it's an object, because we'll just correct
Exactly.
the order in the back end.
Which is more reason, because then you know you want to like override a certain config or add another, you know, potentially optional stuff to your object before passing it on to the action.
Yep.
Just more flexible.
Yep. Well, that makes a lot of sense.
But it's super cool. Like this is something that's super annoying currently, like especially when working with like new contracts or ones you didn't write or as familiar with.
Yeah. And I don't know if we've talked about this internally, but I think, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, we'll make the first parameter, if we go this object route, be like, this is the action data. And then the second parameter, like you'd be able to pass in, this is my session. And like this would actually then take this action and transact it against this session.
Yeah, correct.
And then you'll pass the parameters of the session, like, or like the typos, or like basically like, oh, I'm not gonna broadcast this.
Yeah, there could be. Yeah, this would then
we use
have
this for
those...
every action. Like we almost never broadcast an action when a user signs it. We read, like even in the UI, like we'll capture it, let the user sign it with a long enough expiry, and then us push it and make sure it got pushed to the chain and it passed certain number, like made it to a block. Otherwise, we re-push it until we make sure, you know. So like having that like is crucial. The ability to put the expiry and the broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that I think would be optional. Like this alone should work. And also, let's just response. If we were doing, like, if you wanted more control, in theory, you should be able to do transaction and then do session.transact transaction. And then now you have, here's the actual response. And you could then do broadcast false and basically get whatever it was you needed to do.
Yeah.
And
That works, but then you wouldn't need the await.
Yeah.
Oh no, because you're like, well, it depends what you're doing here. If you already got the ABIs.
I think it might need the await because it, well, no, I guess what you wouldn't need the await if we actually made this an action, because then there is no block header information. There's no expiration or anything. This would actually just output an action, and then this here would be action, and the session.transact call is what would then do the block header, the expiration, all of that other stuff.
So meaning that when you do yourself the rec produce, that will return you almost like an object that has, the name, the account, like this additional stuff from the contract. And then when you do the transact, that's when it puts in the like the authorization and
Yep.
and the other broadcast and stuff.
No, that actually is a valid point. So this object that's coming back should be an actual action. Where do I have tests for that? Someday documentation will exist. Action from, it would be this structure. That's basically
yes,
what
with
it
an
would
empty
return.
authorization at that point before you transact or decide which session to use.
I mean, if you now we're gonna have to figure that out, because part of the thing is we also wanted to template the authorization based on the session that's being used. So maybe it's possible that there's still a session here. And then,
well, if you're using this action method and you're not doing anything with it, it's not like an actual broadcast. You're already doing like await session.transact. So you are, when you actually executed the session to transact it, you have that info. So the action,
generally,
oh, but you don't necessarily
yeah, the action, let me grab, I know I'm juggling windows. So
because you're passing to the action when you're doing reg produce, you're really just passing in the object of the data.
Correct.
And then you're filling in based on ESIO and reg produce, the name and the account. But then you still need the authorization because you don't know this action is going to be called by who. And that for me makes sense when you're calling the transact itself, because there you're saying which session to use. And then automatically it has the blockchain. And if he's using session kit, it has already the authorization that it can inject into this authorization empty array, say initially.
The transact method currently doesn't do that, but one thing we could do is that since we're using ESR payloads for everything at this point, we could have this. Currently, if you just did this, it would return the empty array here, right? It would return almost exactly like this. But something we could do is do the actor, and then I think this is I don't know if that's the right amount of dots, but
just to get around like the safety, the TypeScript stuff.
Yeah, it would return this, and these within the ESR payload specification are placeholder values. They're kind of just wildcards that'll be replaced. And if you did this in a transaction now and passed it through the transact method, it would replace those values with the value from the session. So this is potentially a format we could use to return the full action. So this would come back and it would have this data in here. And then this would be EOSIO. And this would be reg producer. And this wouldn't be transfer. So this is essentially the data that call would return, which is then valid to be passed into a transact call. And the transact call would then template these values to be that of the session. And then it could actually sign it and follow the normal flow.
Without having to introduce additional fields like broadcast or session to the action.
Without complicating this at all. We do still want a session to be a potential that you pass in here. Because if you have the contract and you're calling the action, then you should still be able to fully template it. But we can give the options, I guess. Daniel, how far off base am I from what you were imagining?
I was imagining that you would have the option to get an action, but maybe with like a different method name. So maybe for reg producer, it would be like reg producer action. But I was also imagining that you would also have the ability to just call the broadcast, or I guess transact that action right away.
Yeah. That's a good idea, Daniel. Like basically, it's after how you wrote the action here, you say you're the reg producer. Instead of passing that session at the end, you close it, right? You close it normally, and then you call on this action dot transact and passing the session to it.
Is that, yeah, Daniel? Any thought?
I was thinking like you would have two methods on EOS.io, reg producer and reg producer uppercase A action. And
So
then
like this would
whenever
return the action,
yeah,
is what you're
whenever the
saying?
action, you use that one. If you want to just actually call the method, you just use reg producer. That's what
I guess it's kind of a twist on that. You know, like we did eosio.tables and you could access all the tables. What if you could access all the action structs from actions?
I think that would be preferable to keep it consistent.
What was that?
I think that would be preferable to keep it consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then this would be a struct, and then you could do dot from, and this works just like if you did this. You know, this is a struct, you're calling from on it, and then you're passing the data and it returns an action. So for consistency's sake, like, I guess you could even do this. You could do reg producer equals eosio.actions, and you would be destructing the reg producer struct out. So now you could do reg producer dot from, and then you could pass in the data, and that's how you get an action.
Would it be struct? Or is that a destructuring of the action itself and not the struct? Are we talking about
Structuring of eosio.actions? You're just taking out the reg producer key or object from.
You're taking the JavaScript, not the C++ smart contract struct.
Yeah,
it is a struct, but I mean, there's more than it's an EOSIO core struct essentially, or a WharfKit antelope struct, which could be an action, or it could be a row type, or it's basically just an ABI definition essentially. But this would be the actions. It's just this is a core struct, if that makes any sense.
I mean, that works. But then you would also have reg producer directly on EOSIO.
Correct.
You just call the method directly.
And that would be like the transact method of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, eosio.reg producer, wow, is the like thing that you would await, and it would perform the transaction.
And that's where it comes back to like inheriting which session to use for that.
That kind of, to come full circle, is why we've been thinking about some sort of global state where you could set the active session, and then this static method on this contract would be able to know how to access the global state and know what the default session is. So that way you don't even have to pass anything in. It knows what the active session is, or you could pass in a session.
Yeah. But I do like this method better than what I was suggesting. Like this one where you just await EOSIO direct producer. You can pass on a session, you can pass nothing as a function. It just actually transacts. And then you can do other methods on it, like instead of calling it as a function, you do dot from or dot get action or whatever it may be.
Yeah. And one thing we might be able to do for this globally active session is that if we called restore on the session kit, it's going to pull the last used session out of local storage, and we could just use that. You know, it's specific to a chain, it's specific to an account, and it's specific to a permission. So that's potentially one way we can actually get what the active session is. It's basically the last session that you called restore on, or the last session that was logged in with. So just as kind of an aside to that.
Yeah.
Cool. I mean, this was some good brainstorming. I think it brought some clarity on our side, at least I hope. And this is, we're deep into this side of discussion on the contract kit about how we want the end user or the end developer's syntax to behave. So that way it, it's something easy and robust enough for all of us to use. Like the contract kit really is this new thing that we've never had before. When we, I think it was February, proposed that we focus on the session kit and delay the contract kit, one of those justifications was that the session kit replaces something that we all use that's kind of painful to use. And the contract kit can probably wait because it's more theoretical and it's something we've never had before. So this is very much that whole thing we've never had. And we'd really like for developers in this space to have a hand in helping shape what that end experience is. So definitely appreciate being able to monopolize some of these calls times to really kind of dive into this stuff. I know we are running over the hour we had dedicated for this. So trying to create the opportunity to shut down if we need to. Cool. Any other comments, thoughts, suggestions on that side of things? Daniel, is there any last thoughts you had or anything like that?
Not really. I'm glad we had this conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Seems like we're aligned.
So we will.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
I'm so happy to hear that. Like we internally see a lot of this stuff and we're like, oh, this is going to be awesome. But like we have our own little echo chamber that needs outside input.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's just from like people who are familiar. Like
Mhm.
obviously these advantages like just go exponential for new developers who are not familiar.
Yeah.
True.
The new developer experience using this syntax, like specifically stuff like this, currently the user has to add all the like 3 or 4 extra fields into this to be able to do it. And they don't have any autocomplete at all for what actually would go in this. There's a lot of learning you need to do before you can develop. And this will hopefully lower that barrier. So that way, like the code will teach you as you're typing it. So
Would
I'm
be nice
excited about that.
It would be nice if the ABIs, instead of putting the Ricardian contract stuff in it, would be nice if there was a field that's like label, just a string of explanation of what that field is, where then you can just pop it, through hovering. You can be like, oh, this field is, you put your account name in it that you want to actually, become a block producer, and then it's up to the smart contract developers to add that in if they choose.
Yeah. That would be an awesome update to the ABI specification. And hopefully like once we have this in the wild and we're all using it to build things, maybe that's our opportunity to say, hey, whoever controls the CDT, we would like this additional field for developers, and then to encourage developers to fill it out the specific way. And then we can, once that exists, we could pull it in. And, when you hover over reg producer, there's an English description of the function towards developers. I think right now we are planning on putting the contract to show for the English description of the function, but it's going to be targeted at the user as opposed to the developer.
Yeah, it's going to be UI render stuff.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, if there's more thoughts, we're very open to hearing them. I started on a forum post that I should probably post here in the not too distant future. It'll be on the WharfKit repo under, if you just go to the root org, there's this discussion board, and eventually the post that I have started writing will be here, and it will be all about data and how you get it out of smart contracts. It'll be like a continuation asynchronously of the discussion we've been having for the past 2 weeks here. Hopefully we'll be able to get some more input that way as well. So So yeah, let's keep this topic moving forward. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the upcoming weeks as the contract kit begins to steal the focus from the session kit. And yeah, we'll keep doing these meetings. So thanks for joining us this week, and we will do it again soon.